I'm here with HJ Pack, and this is our long-awaited interview. Yay.
Okay.
So, so you and I have known each other a really long time. Tell us your name, where you
HJ
live, and
Pack. I'm living in Los Angeles in Hancock Park in beautiful Hancock Park, California.
great. And you've been married for how long? Is it 25?
25 years.
25 years to my dear friend, Emmy award-winning friend, Bill Johnson. So tell me about you, a little bit about what it is that you do, and then talk about your boys.
So I run business development for PricewaterhouseCoopers in the emerging company space. And so I work with startups to look for companies that I think are going to be big or go public. And I sell PwC services to them, usually audit and tax.
And
And
you've been
I've
doing
always
that.
I've been
Oh, I know.
doing that I've had a high-end service sale for close to 30 years. I've been at PwC over 11 years. And prior to that, I was with R.R. Donnelley for 17, which was selling financial printing to companies that we think were going public.
And tell us about your boys.
Boys, I have two boys. One is about to be 20 and one is 18 and a half. One is a freshman at NYU, and the second is a second year because they don't say freshman and sophomore at the University of Chicago, U Chicago.
And what are they studying respectively? What are they majoring in?
So Billy, I think, will be doing philosophy and maybe some art. And Danny is at Gallatin, and so he's majoring right now in something called storytelling. And storytelling is a pretty broad major. And they don't do majors as much as concentrations at Gallatin, but the boys are very different. They both went to Harvard Westlake, and the whole point of when you have parents and when you're talking about Dan, the whole process is everything always works out. And it's best to, as always, parent the kid you have.
Talk about that a little bit. Parent the kids you have as opposed to what age?
They're trying to make them be something that they're not, right? Like people, I have been asked a tons because my boys went to public school for elementary school and then they went to upper school at Harvard Westlake, which is a
Mhm.
very rigorous school. And I get people who ask me that what's the outplacement? And to me, it's never been a path to go to college. It's more like you just try to figure out what your best self is and what's going to work. Because honestly, it just doesn't matter. The relationships that, for instance, my boys have from high school are probably, and I make my living off my relationships, are as good, if not better, than mine now after years and years and years of work. So I feel like if you want, because people ask me, it's like, what do you think about Harvard Westlake? And I loved Harvard Westlake, and it was a great experience for both my boys, but very different. Billy is very academic, pretty rigorous. Yeah, so people always ask me, I said, if you want to go, I mean, honestly, if you want to go to an Ivy League school, you're better off going to an inner city school and being number one in your class in a distressed neighborhood school. But will you get as great of an education? The opportunities that you have at the boys' high school were pretty spectacular. They did things they never would have, just because it's not offered everywhere. It doesn't have the resources. This is a very well resourced school. But is it the path to, because there are lots of exceptional children at that school. So you're just one of a many exceptional children, which is totally fine because you rise to being exceptional. That's
It's
what
a
I think.
really it's an intriguing no, it's a really intriguing comment, and we talked about this the other night when we were at Alex and Bill's, and this is coming up a lot in the news, and you and I have known each other a long time, but this pattern's changing, right? Where last
Oh yeah,
year X number of
absolutely.
kids came out of private schools. Can you talk about that process and what you're seeing as a mom? Because your boys were at, first of all, can you tell what Harvard Westlake is, just for the people who are listening in on
It's
it?
an elite prep school. So I would say what they would say probably like nationwide top five prep school. They're always very, it's like Andover, Exeter, Harvard Westlake, they all look around. But but it's a great rigorous school. But yeah, I used to always say that if my public high school was Fairfax, and I would think, like, if Billy went to Fairfax, he'd be going to Harvard. But if Danny went to Fairfax, he'd be going to jail. So I'm okay with this.
And to back to that the comment that you made, and I think it's a really profound comment, and I've never heard it stated that way. But you parent the kids that you have, and you've always had, you and Bill have always had this just very, I don't know, chill way about you. It's just one of the many things I love so much
Yeah,
about you.
no. I do not honestly could not care. Like they need to be the best versions of themselves in a place where they can be set up to succeed. But there's a lot of great schools, and it's always with everything. It's any kind of relationship. It's just got to be a fit.
Can you talk more about that, about fit with respect to just high school and college and just life? Because we talked about that over the last decade.
I always just think that like when I get when people ask me advice about different things, and I said it's the best thing to do is when you look at colleges like and like for like on when college when they went on their college tour, you don't necessarily look at schools as you do types of schools. Or do you want fraternities and sororities and a Greek system and football games? Is that your vision of what you think a happy college life is? Do you want to be in an urban environment? Do you want to be in a suburban size? Like all those things are things you look at. And people like I have a lot of friends who don't necessarily have the resources to be going to visiting all these schools.
Hmm.
But in Los Angeles, you can go check out UCLA, go check out USC, go check out Occidental, go out to Claremont and look at those. So those are all very different schools, and you can get a feeling of the vibe when you go to the schools. And they're all very different. So, I have friends whose kids would have been really unhappy they love Michigan. It's exactly what they want. They want football games every Saturday. But I have plenty of kids, they could care less about that. And as a matter of fact, they don't like the drinking pressure or the pressure of a big party school. Like they don't want that. And it's for me, it's always trying to find your people. And the problem is sometimes on the little schools is it's hard to find your people. You don't necessarily meet everybody. So those are the things. So that's why I was thinking it's really important for people to just try to find their fit. And there's a lot of great schools. And when it comes down to it, it just doesn't really, honestly, just doesn't really matter. When they're done, it's like you're at a certain level. It's all good. You'd like them to go to college, ideally, and you'd like them to graduate. But yeah, you
Hopefully
just
they'll
want to be
graduate.
happy.
Yeah.
You just want
We
to make
want
them be happy.
that's it. So is that if you were to wind it back not too far, is that what's your goal? What's your goal for your boys? I'm hearing it for them to be happy. Is that if you
Mm.
peeled away the
Yeah,
onion,
you want them to be happy and contribute to society. Good relationships. That's really all you want from somebody. It's all I want for myself. So what do I want for them too? Feel like you
and
add value, you work hard, you add value within the relationships and hopefully to the world in little ways or big ways. That's all you can do. And like college is just a step in that big journey. And then there's a lot of steps, right? So I don't know. I honestly am not a traditional Korean tiger mom at all. I'm really not. And I never,
you're not, but you were born in the States, yes? You were born here or
I
were
was
you
born in
born in
Korea.
Seoul? You
No,
were
I was
born
born in
and
Korea.
you were born in
Yeah.
Seoul? And
Yeah.
when did you
We were
emigrate?
little, like three, we came, like they call us the 1.5s. My Korean's not very good. I have tons of friends who are Indian tiger moms and tons of them, but it's never been my thing.
Yeah.
I also, it's because I went to UCLA and I'm doing just fine
UCLA is one of the hard
now, but back then, no. It was always a great school, but that's the
right.
whole part about the elitism of all. It just doesn't matter.
Talk about the elitism piece of it. Because
Well,
many people would talk about, my perception is many people would talk about the elitism. My company's called Elite Student Coach, but elite doesn't modify the schools they go to. Elite modifies the kid. And any kid can be elite in a way that matters to them. This is where you and
yeah,
we've spoken about this before. It's
yeah,
about fit within yourself, yes? And I
yeah,
wanted to
yeah,
get back to this point before we get to this, because you said something that just was so interesting. That visiting Occidental, which is a stunning school, Occidental, a tiny school. What I
yeah,
heard you saying was visit campuses, like even if they're not the ones you're going to see, if you don't have the resources to go to see them, visit schools
yeah,
that might be like the schools. Is that
yeah,
what you were talking about? Can you talk about
yeah.
that? What you meant by that?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. It's like the fit. You want to see this is what a little school looks like. This is what a big public school looks like. This is a 40,000 campus school. This is a tiny campus school. This is rural. I do feel like if you can't see that, then you can't go traveling across the country for all that. You can go visit schools that are like those schools. And if you go to Oxford, if you go to UC, if you go to UCLA, oh my God, there's 30,000 kids here. This is not for me. Then don't go to Michigan. Don't go to Wisco. That's not in your thing. So for us, when they were little, Billy and Danny went with their dad to visit Dartmouth because Bill went to Dartmouth. And afterwards, Danny said, "Oh, Mom, I don't want to go to Dartmouth." And I said, "Well, why?" Meanwhile, thinking to myself, "That's good because you'll never get in." But he goes, "Because I don't want to go to school in the middle of nowhere." And then I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, then no Bowdoin, no Bard, no that because you don't want to go to school in the middle of nowhere, which makes sense. Like he's a city boy. He grew up in
Yeah,
LA. He wants good Korean food around the corner. He wants and so he ends up in New York, which is perfect
it's a great fit
in
for him.
Manhattan. Yeah, so it's
And
always like I said, it's a fit. Whereas a lot of people when it's an adjustment because it's a big urban school, but sometimes it's there's a lot of adjusting to do. College is a big adulting change, so you if it's not a good fit, it can be really a problem. I mean, have we at during I think at New Year's we were having dinner with like families, and the toast was none of our kids came home. We're still in school. Yay! We'll take that. Take that. And they're all over the place. One was at Boston College, one's at Wesleyan, one's at Oregon, Bill Danny's at NYU. It's great. They're all still in school. We'll take that.
So still in school, meaning they haven't dropped out of school.
Yeah, and I had a couple friends who had kids who withdrew, and they're going back, but they were not having a good first semester.
And was that because, and again, this is stuff that you and I talked about this with Bill earlier on. There's across the board in the United States, there's about a 28 to 30% dropout rate, dropout and come back rate, or dropout altogether due to reasons related to stress, mental health, a lot of things that
All
we
the above.
didn't see
Yeah,
so
it was
much
all of
of.
that, all the
Can,
above.
can you talk a little bit about what with that? Not, I don't think with your boys, but what you, how you're seeing that, because you've been part of the Harvard Westlake ecosystem for a while, and you've been around a lot of other
Yeah,
families.
but so funny, right? Like I didn't necessarily see that Harvard Westlake was stressful for the boys,
Hmm.
but like I said, it's also a fit, right? Because
Yes.
I have friends who, when they first went there, we were talking about schools, like he had older kids, and his was like my daughter thrived and my son barely survived. So it's usually sometimes a second sibling because they're not the ones who have looked at first. And if it's and talking to you, like I said, you will do your children no favors if you're trying to make them go to a school where they're not going to succeed at. No one wants to feel like they're the dumbest person in the class. Yeah, whatever you pull you're doing to get there, and if they're not the right place for them, like you are doing them no favors. So
Yeah,
if you
no,
need
I'm
like to
sorry, I didn't
play
mean to step
4 hours
on.
of academic tutoring for them to just, it's not your school. This I mean, if you this is not your school. You should go to a school where they don't grade, or it's just not a fit. Like you don't want to. I really think parents do their kids a disservice if they're trying to put the whole round peg in a round hole. It's the whole Albert Einstein. If you judge a fish on its ability to ride a bike,
I think it was
then
ride a
just don't
bike or
think you're an
climb a
idiot.
tree, but yeah,
Yeah, something like that. But
absolutely. Yeah, round peg square holding it. No, you're absolutely right. And to that end, I wonder what your perception is because you've been around a lot of parents and you've been around a lot of, and I've known your boys. I remember
mhm,
when I was just a little tiny bundle when Billy was born. You weren't at the
yeah,
house, you were out working. But when he was just a tiny little bundle, and then when I was back in Boston taking care of my late dad about 5 years ago, when Bill and the boys came through, they weren't nearly
hmm,
as big as they were right now, and they commented on going to Fenway Park and how do they play ball in there? It's so tiny.
yeah,
But there we're seeing just the profound change that I'd seen in them over time. And the data point before that was when we went to your beautiful Jonathan Club. You took us
yeah,
out
yeah,
to dinner, and they just gotten into the Harvard Westlake. I think they just
yeah.
been admitted. So having those data points over time of seeing them, and I wonder, given that they seem very chill about it, how did they handle the going through the system on their own? The from ninth grade on 10th grade on identifying schools and approaching that. Were they chill because you were chill about it? Were they impacted by their classmates? Were they impacted classmates at Westlake and other kids that they knew? What's your hit on that?
Really think like when Danny's friends, like when Danny went to like when Danny went to Europe after college, like his crew, one's at Harvard, one's at Stanford, one's at Brown, one's at Columbia, one's at Penn. And everyone's, maybe it's like those after effects of COVID. The rules just don't apply anymore. They're just so different.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows what they are. And maybe it's also because he doesn't hang around crazy people and I don't hang around crazy people.
Present company excluded.
That's not our, and everyone's hyper successful in their own way and everyone
Right.
has a different path to get there. So it's that whole thing. Like there's enough, yes. If you want to be the CEO of a things or a startup, is it much better to go to HBS or GSB? Absolutely. But you know what? There's tons of CEOs from everywhere. And
Absolutely.
and it's the fact that I am in the business world that way, there's tons. So the things that I'm pleased about when I think about the boys is that Billy is a good writer. Danny is working on his writing, but Billy is a good and is an excellent writer. He'll be fine. They just need to learn how to communicate, trying to make sure that they're not late. Drives me crazy when people are late. But yeah, it's more like that. Responsible. It's not the whole golden rule. Like those are the things that matter more. And as you said, like you said, you're teaching people to be elite kids. Like where they end up, like their path is going to be great because of who they are, not because of where they went to school.
Yeah, you nailed it. And I think, and I want to put words in your mouth, so I want to see if this makes sense. Elite kids in a way that's meaningful for them.
Yeah,
Yeah, in a way that's natural and organic for them.
yeah, yeah,
Authentic seems to be the word of the day. Everybody's using authentic, but authentic for them.
yeah,
So can you reflect on your boys and what was authentic for them? I had the pleasure of working with one. I had the pleasure of working with Billy.
yeah.
You were kind enough to ask me to step in on that one. But before maybe talk about that process from your side and like how you observe the essay process, Can you talk about how your boys emerged from their own chrysalim in Hebrew? I don't know what it would be, whatever, their own little shells and
I think
became
it's
the
because
young.
honestly, I would give a lot of that credit to Harvard Westlake because of the
Mm,
opportunities that they had. Billy learned, he's little and he learned wrestling. And wrestling, he had to be physical in a way that maybe he never would have ever done. Ever. Like when boys were little, like we always have tons of boys and they'd be like scrapping. He would always be the ref because he doesn't like to get in there. But with wrestling, he had to. And it was great for him. Like he did that for 4 years. And then they have a huge art studio. So Billy started working with clay and you have to do arts and sing. So they had those kind of opportunities. They get to discover and spend time and be learn about themselves in different ways than just and they have like fabulous teachers. So I kind of feel like I have a lot because they do spend so much time at school. That's a that is a choice, and the fact that you have so many different opportunities there. There was one semester that Billy was literally on campus Monday through Saturday, no, Monday through Sunday, every day, because Saturdays were wrestling and Sundays was rehearsal for the musical. So the only day he had day off because they had the fires and school was closed on a Monday, Tuesday. But other
mm.
than that, he did not go to school every day for 5 weeks. So
Yeah.
it was just intense, but Billy's an intense kid and it worked out for him. And he was doing stuff that he loved. He was wrestling and he was doing musical theater along with his other academics. So I feel like it's like they let to learn and experience. And Danny's big thing at Harper Westlake was filmmaking at Westlake. And he was a leader
Mm.
there. And they both joined something called, which they both adored, called, we call peer support because it is
What was that job? What did they both join? Age?
a peer support.
Peer support. And what was
So
that?
it's like probably the biggest club on campus, and and they meet once a week, and they break out in small groups, and you have seniors who are leaders, and juniors who are trainees, and sophomores who are attendees, and they do. It's basically like a consciousness. It's basically a student-run peer support group, and
Okay.
it's something they both are involved with, very involved with, and they met some of the best friends. And so those are the
Okay.
things that. So I feel like you try to keep them safe, and you try to give them the opportunities to learn and become themselves, but you can't force them. Teenagers don't listen to you at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You used the word adult and you turned it into a verb. I love turning nouns into verbs and adulting. And I'm wondering, there's an article, it came out yesterday, I think it was the Atlantic or the New York Times, where it said one of the main ROIs of going to college is maturing from a teen into an adult or a young adult. Can you talk about that, your views on that, on going from a teen to a young adult? Because I've never heard somebody use the word adulting. I'm going to borrow it if you don't mind for now, but talk about adulting from the age point of view.
I think it's learning how to do everything by yourself because frankly, they've lived very protected and privileged lives. But now you have to do even the basics. Like they know how, they've always known how to do their own laundry, but they don't do it at home because Ceci does it. But they know how. So it's not like they were the kids who went there and didn't know how to do laundry. They just occasionally you'd have, like when Ceci's on vacation for her 3 weeks, then they'll have to do laundry.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is it's just the basic of having to take care of yourself, realizing that if you watch it, it's not gonna nothing, everything's on you. Feeding yourself, which you would think is relatively simple, but feeding yourself, clothing yourself, cleaning up after yourself. I think the boys are happy to see me and Bill when they come home, but they're really happy to see Ceci.
Just for clarity's sake, who is Ceci?
Ceci's our housekeeper.
Okay. Just for the sake of clarity. Yeah, I think I met her. I met her a while ago.
Oh yeah, I've had her since Annie was born.
She's absolutely lovely. And you talked about something before, about a few minutes ago, about being on time. And I'm an on-time freak too. Maybe it came from I never was, but maybe came from living in Japan and Germany, these Axis power countries where when a meeting starts at 7, it starts at 7. And when TV Guide used to get published, it wasn't like 7, 7:30, it's 7:12, 7, and the train stuck right on time. Talk about time, how you manage time, and then talk about your perception about how kids manage
Terrible about
time.
it. I'm terrible about it. It's one of those things that I'm terrible about it because I need to, because the problem is as you get older and when you're used to being able to remember everything,
Mhm.
and yeah, you just don't. And at the same time, you don't really, you haven't, because you never had to, you don't have the systems in place. So now it's like I try to take more notes. I try to do more to-do lists, whereas I would just know before. So it's terrible. So I'm terrible about that. But it is better. It's better to be not, it's better to have had to have those systems in place because then when everything else starts falling apart, they're already in place. Instead, now I'm like, oh, okay, I got to make a list. I got to figure because it's terrible. Aging. It's not for the faint of heart. But I do think that they just have to figure it out. And that's one of the nice things about having school so far. I have a girlfriend, but her kids, one's at Santa Barbara, one
Mhm.
was in San Diego, one was at UCLA. She has all their stuff Amazon to her house so she can deliver it.
And she's some of the sake of this recording. She lives in Los Angeles. I'm guessing your girlfriend lives in
Yes,
Los Angeles.
yes.
So these are all within drive. Anything's within driving distance. Pakistan, where I'm going to, is within driving distance, but they're doing driving distance. So everything gets Amazon to your girlfriend's house here in LA. And then is it that she wants to do that? Is there
Yes,
a
she just wants to see them. So
uh,
she'll whatever they need, she sends to her house and then drives to Santa Barbara, San Diego, or Los Angeles, West LA.
versus you? And what when I was working with
Oh no, no,
the
there's no
one
way
son that
to
I had the pleasure of working with, it was they applied to a bunch of schools. How is it for you having your one son half a continent away and another one a full continent away?
fine. That's as it should be. Yes, it's like but I don't love booking their flights. It takes so long because you've got the time difference and the flights, and then you feel like you got to get them up at 8, and yeah, no. So ideally, I wish the flights were a little bit faster. But other than that, no, they should be. Otherwise, you would be tempted to not you'd be tempted, but maybe you obviously one of her sons, my friend, her son had opportunity to go to Yale or UCLA because they're runners.
Okay.
But she just was like terrified he would go to Yale because it was so far, and it was her first. I was like, oh my God. I this woman, the her sons are all runners,
Hmm.
and they have this big retreat
Hmm.
and she goes and runs with them in the morning.
This isn't the same. No, this is not the same woman who has the stuff delivered from
Yeah,
Amazon. This is, I don't want to
talk
say the
about
word
not.
codependent because that's not IB, but a little bit, maybe a little
I
bit.
think it's rabbit ass crazy. Like you gotta let them go.
Yeah, and I think, and we've talked about you, Bill and I talked about this, and we talked about this 3 years ago when I was working with Billy, that leaving home, whether they leave home and they go down the street to
No,
UCLA or across
no,
the
no.
country, they're
They
still it's leaving
no,
home,
they were
right? It's
not
still,
allowed to apply to UCLA or
oh, you
USC.
didn't allow them, you didn't allow them, you wanted them out of California was the rule.
Oh, they could go to Stanford. They could have gone to Santa Barbara, but they didn't apply to any UCs.
Okay,
And both of them did their ED, so you would just never know.
right.
Billy did ED 1, and so he applied to Chicago, and that was it. And Danny did ED 2 to NYU, so they've essentially applied to 2 schools. So we have no.
That was
But
it,
yeah, like
right?
I said, had they gone to Stanford, or like I said, or Santa Barbara, or even San Diego,
Right.
I just didn't want them 2 miles to the right or 3 miles to the left or four. We're in the middle of UCLA and USC, so that would
So SC and UCLA were off the map. Okay.
off the table.
Yeah, and which makes sense. Back to the time management thing. So I heard about time management with you, and you talked about being late. How about time management for kids, for your sons? How do they manage time, and what's your observation of that?
So we had to do more of that. Like they went to a traditional kindergarten,
Hmm.
and when they were little, we had to teach them or go with their homework. But then they've been on their own since. So like I said, so I had a friend who has a sixth grader at the center, which is a school here, and
Hmm.
she said we have to sit down and do his homework with him every night. And then I was like, yeah, maybe you should be applying to Harvard Westlake because if you're doing that in sixth grade, frankly, it's not. I can't even imagine having then they need to go, if they need that much hand holding, this is not the school for you. You need to go to Crossroads or Buckley.
Yeah, Crossroads, or I'm trying to think of other schools that would be right. There may be a couple of other schools, but no, I mean you're absolutely right. My question to you here is, you talked about the opportunities that your kids had at Harvard, which fabulous school for so many reasons. I wonder what your hit is, because you mentioned also earlier on, maybe for some kids it's better instead of being middling student at an Ivy to go to a public university where you could be crushing it. And maybe it's the same for high school. There's other reasons too. I'm
Yeah.
starting to see some of the poobahs in the college admissions space saying because they're taking fewer kids from private high schools now, go to a public high school, but one out in, say, in Arkansas or in Oklahoma or South Dakota because schools want. So you're having these wealthy families sort of second guessing this. What's your hit on the second guess? I think I know the answer to this. What's your hit on the second guessing the system?
It doesn't make any sense to me at all. It really doesn't. Because like I said, at the end, you're just going, that makes no sense. It makes no sense to game the system. It's not, it, it's up in the air. It's just every class has a student who's ridiculously amazing and they don't get in anywhere. You have no idea why. Or they get in one and you're like, really? Huh. Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, you just don't know. It's just so bizarre.
Or the other way around. They'll get admitted to a Penn and rejected from I don't know, UMass. I'm
Yeah, the
that
whole
may be
thing.
the extreme example. It's just
Maybe I was like reading this newspaper. It's they didn't get into UCI, but they got into Yale. Great, go to Yale.
you landed on it before. It's about fit, right?
Yeah,
And isn't it ultimately so you went to UCLA, which I mean, we have an age spread between you and I, but back in the day, UCLA was a very different school. It's different now than it was 3 years ago,
yeah,
2 years ago. It's a 60,000 person campus or so altogether when you wrap everything in. It's the largest, one of the largest schools
you can
on the
imagine.
planet.
Yeah.
What was your experience like at UCLA? Just what was your experience,
We went
undergrad
with like
experience like?
probably 18,000, and it was great. It was much. It was even like physically, it was small. The campus was smaller. When you're on the dorms, there was like four. It was like, and it was hard to get a dorm, but it was Dykstra, Hedrick, Sproul, and Reber, and so there's four residence halls, and then you have the suites. And now I think there's at least two more.
And
So
another one that's about to spring up because there's been a lot of private investment in that. And housing is a huge issue. Sorry, housing is a huge issue at all the schools, like at all the schools right now. Wow.
it's actually funny because when you're a Regent scholar at the UCs, you get extra points for certain things. And I was a Regent scholar. So when you're at UCLA, you get guaranteed parking because that's prime. Whereas at Berkeley, you get guaranteed housing because that's more prime. But in LA, seriously, it's funny because there's plenty of apartments in Westwood. Like housing is at least one of my there wasn't like I said, the icing, the guarantee was parking.
Such a the difference between Northern California and Southern
Yeah,
California. You get
yeah,
parking here, housing and
yeah.
housing there.
That's what was guaranteed was parking, and that was huge because that was important. How do
But
you get
yeah, no, I
parking?
mean, but like, and this person from the East Coast, Bill, again, from the East Coast, and even now it's changed a lot. But back in the day, and even as recently as the other day, I was talking to a mom back there, and she's, oh no, the UCs, they're not, they're just state schools. No, they're not. They're the Ivies of California. They're, I think UCLA is the most applied to school, unless I'm wrong, in the United States. They're
Oh,
just different.
yeah,
The most applied to school for different reasons. And you
yeah.
apply to the dynamic. It's just a very different. They're all very different.
They're all very different.
They're all different. I wonder
Yeah,
if you could speak to that too. There, I've run across kids and families, and I have a very small tribe because I only work one to one. But this perception of the Ivies, you probably talked to some parents or kids like this. I'm going to apply to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton and Dartmouth, and you do realize these are very different animals.
yeah.
They're very different. What's your? I know your perspective, but just talk to me a little bit about that. What you've seen.
Like I said, I'm trying to figure out what your fit is, right?
Mm.
And the schools are very different. And what I'd say of what is it, the most elite would probably be Princeton, Harvard, Yale. They're
I
about the
think
same size.
probably in terms of size, and if you ask people, if you ask some
Minority
people in the
it
States,
would be like,
primarily outside the United States, they would probably do that too. Depends
yeah,
on what you want. Like
yeah,
I talked to a kid the other day who not a good, I talked very limited, and he said, I want to study engineering at Harvard. And I said, that's great. They just don't have engineering at Harvard. He said, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, they don't. So I said, I want to study music too. I said, they do have music at Harvard. Are you really sure? I'm like, I'm very sure. Like this is what I do for a living. They don't. Now you can go across the river to MIT. Harvard and MIT will have, you're in a town like Boston, there's some permeability. But
yeah,
again, this goes to the perception thing. They're what's elite and what's elite for you, because we've
yeah,
seen that happen, that round peg square hole thing. And it's
yeah,
about hit. I don't know whether you've seen this happen or not, but I've certainly seen it happen where kids with whom I work and other parents with whom I talk to, I don't work, they'll go to a school where case in point, one of my kids, one of the juniors, really wanted to go see Chicago. Chicago, perfect fit. I said, when you're in Chicago, you should also go see Northwestern. I said, I don't think Northwestern's for me. So do you know why? I said, I really don't know. And he landed on Chicago, and he and his dad, they came from Texas. They're fabulous town. Your boys would love him so much. I'd really love to introduce them. They just really like this kid, Neil, particularly both of them for different reasons. And he called me from the University of Chicago campus, and he goes, everything on paper is perfect. It's just something just doesn't feel right. And I said, can you put your finger on it? He goes, I can't, but we've been here for an hour. Everybody's lovely. I can't put my finger on it. I said, you and your dad drive across town. He's first generation. His parents grew up in Nepal, so he's first generation. But drive across town. But his dad lived in Chicago for a long time. Drive across town. He said, all right, I really don't think it's going to be for me. A couple hours later, he called. He goes, I love it here. I love it so much. I'm standing at the edge of the lake. I'm standing at the edge of the lake. I said, what's your takeaway? He said, perception is everything. Like pre-perception and then perception when you're there, if you can make it there.
yeah,
He said, I'm so glad because rule outs are as useful as rule outs. Why waste the time going through that? Chicago is a
yeah,
big, we went through this together, right? Chicago is a
yeah,
big application process, and it's the time that you spend on that. Time's
yeah,
our only non-renewable resource. So you grew up in LA, right? You grew up in
yeah,
Los Angeles?
yeah.
Whereabouts, where in LA did you grow up?
I grew up in Torrance.
So how was it? Was UCLA from the beginning? Was it that's where I'm going to go to school? And how did you make your
It
decision?
was so different back then. It was not all my friends who went to UCLA all say that we could never get in there now. That's just how it was.
I
Just
think
how it was.
I think a lot of people in our age range feel the same way. Bill and I talked about that when we had lunch the other day.
Yeah.
Like, Bill, could you get in a panel? I don't know. It was a little more predictable. I mean, you had great grades and you did well and you had some interesting activities and you wrote a great application because that was really what separated things. That's still one of the key factors right now.
But I
Um,
feel like my boys didn't even apply to the UCs because they felt like their scores, they're test blind. They it's highly GPA oriented, and like public schools in California have flat grades. There's not
right,
pluses and minuses, whereas Harvard Westlake is all pluses and minuses. So GPAs, it's much harder to get the GPAs that they want, and we don't have limits on the APs. It's just a
right.
different animal set or different data set for that.
Yeah.
And then you can't tell me they read those essays when they get 100,000 applications.
It's an interesting question. How do you think it works? Do you think they read them at all? Do you think what's your perception as a parent? Because you've been through it twice now.
The whole thing is that I didn't have a traditional experience, right? Because
Mm.
A, I don't really care about that way. I mean, really, I really we don't. The voice test very well. Grades are fine, but also grades are not like Billy has tons of A minuses, so it was just never like A maybe would apply to Berkeley because a lot of his friends ended up going to Berkeley, but by that time I don't know if he had heard, but the likelihood of like if he decided to ED to Chicago, the
Mhm.
likelihood of him getting in was pretty high, which is exactly what happened.
Mhm.
But so we just never bothered for that because I feel like it's pretty GPA oriented. I feel like they must do some sort of culling on GPAs. I don't think they would make a cut.
It's an interesting question, and a lot of it has to do. And we talked about this when you brought me into orbit, and it was so much fun to see him again. And you and Bill called and said, "Would you?" I
Yeah,
said, "Yeah, I mean, your family, of course. I would kill to do it, please."
yeah,
And for some reason, I expected it was going to be Billy, and Danny came and picked me up here at the place because we're
yeah,
a one car family. And I got just the place to take you, Dad. So we went, we just had this very chill Mexican lunch and we talked. And he is an intense kid, but he's also got that wicked sense of humor. Not wicked Boston, just that wicked, like a whip smart sense of humor
yeah, yeah,
underneath it. And we had a long Mexican lunch and delicious taco place in like a strip mall. And and he showed me pictures of his art because I'd never seen his art.
yeah.
And he looked at me with this like glimmer in his eye. He said, "Do you want to see some of my art?" I said, "I really want to see some pictures of your art." And initially, it was one of these pieces that was a hanging piece of art. It was just, yeah, I think you know the piece I'm talking about.
Mobile, I love.
It was stunning. It was just so stunning. And because I went into this blind, not knowing, I knew that he was going to apply there. But you had said, "Would you just go into orbit and see what you think on this?" So, what drove you to have him talk to somebody else, whether it was me or somebody else? What was the imperative when it came to your first son for his first choice to talk to anybody about the attack
I
pattern is?
have friends who have had people that they have hired since I think they're freaking eighth grade and or earlier. That is not me. That's not me at all. Honestly, Dan, if you weren't a friend, we had someone help them with their SAT prep and you, and that's it. Because I'm not that. I'm a that is not a. It's not in the budget. It's ridiculous. In other people's budgets, I have tons of friends who do that.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
just you're a friend, and so that was important, right? It's
Right.
always about the relationship because if you hire someone and they don't get your kid, then the kid just feels bad about himself.
It's a great comment, and this was why I felt so honored because it was like I didn't have that many data points. I'd probably met him 8 or 9 times since I first
Yeah,
saw him as a swaddled baby, and Bill brought me over to the house, and just a smile visible from his your husband's smile.
yeah.
It's the same smile
Well,
you
the
have
thing
in your
is, Dan,
kids.
is like what you're doing is by helping people be more themselves and comfortable, but it's always a fit. Because I've had friends who've hired people, and when it's not a fit, it's doing nobody any favors.
In those cases, and this is no man to slam them, but it's all about fit. When it isn't a fit, what have you observed when that's gone south with them? What isn't a fit? What isn't a fit when it comes to your friends and what you've seen? Is it that it's too stiff or that they're not mentoring, or is it what's your observation about that
I
process?
think what is happening is that the child does not want to go to any of their meetings. or doesn't open up and doesn't do anything because they don't like them. Or when they talk about it, they don't necessarily get each other. Yeah, I still like a girl was had someone. She's fine. She's very happy at Davis, and that was her first choice to begin
Mm,
with. But
mm,
I was a little bit like maybe it's because of the information that Vala gave to the tutor, but
mm,
she had a 4.5 coming from with lots of honors classes coming
mm,
from Palos Verdes High School.
mm,
She was the first cohort of female Eagle Scouts in the things. Let me tell you, she applied to, this is where her person had her applied to, and she liked biology. And maybe she had said originally that maybe, I think this is what ended up happening is because she said that she was interested in West Coast schools.
okay.
So they had her apply to the UCs, Oregon,
Yeah.
Washington,
Okay. And that's it.
and Stanford.
Okay. So she wanted to stay. She wanted to stay West Coast because Oregon and Washington
Didn't really
have.
know.
So there wasn't any guidance, is what I'm hearing, that there wasn't any guidance about
No,
whether to take a look. Yeah.
this is a very wealthy family. There is no financial need. So it's like, why don't you check out some schools on the East Coast? Not that there's anything wrong with Oregon, but you are applying to no reach schools except Stanford. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and Oregon. So the secret, and it's already for schools like Oregon and Washington, especially, which is the University of Washington, I assume you're talking about, which is a like breathtaking school. It is a
Yeah.
safety school, but it's not a safety school because it's not a good school. It's a safety school because it doesn't have.
I wouldn't
It's a
say
huge,
I wouldn't say Washington is a safety school. I would say it was a target
right, but
school.
relative, it would a target for hers. One of the
Oregon's a
reasons that
safety
people end up
school.
applying is they are very with kids who have got
It's a
those
great
kinds of
school. It's a great
numbers.
school.
They're very generous with merit-based scholarship numbers.
Yes, other safety,
Extremely generous.
bro. Like this is a very wealthy family.
And it's not that wealthy families don't necessarily find that appealing, but that's not necessarily a gating factor. That's not a front-end gating factor for families
Yes.
when it comes to that. But it sounds like there were a couple of good, and I'm tickled about Davis because one of my kids who was accepted everywhere, which is quite a trick, ended up going to Davis and just loving it up there, just
No, he
loving
loves
it
Davis.
so
And
much.
she loves Davis. She absolutely loves Davis and
In
was
fact,
going to be her first school. So it ended up being fine. But I was like, really? You're not
yeah,
applying anywhere? And then she ended up playing it to Vermont UVM,
yeah,
which of course, but I was like, what about you don't? Okay. I was like, I literally was like, this is what the person said. And I'm thinking, and then I think it must have been, I think came out later that yes, she wanted to stay on the West Coast, but she
okay.
didn't really. She just didn't know.
He didn't
And
know.
isn't the whole point that you're supposed to just give them different opportunities? There's like people because of the tours and because of the counseling department, kids, you have a fair amount of, not a fair, but you'll definitely have kids every year who go to University of Richmond, Case Western, Reserve, because the deans at Harvard Westlake recommend them. That they were great schools, they're just not as known. So the whole point is that you don't necessarily know that. And she particularly doesn't know. She's checking 17 million Palo Verdes.
No, and true words never spoken. And Case Western's another just great case in point. I like, and you're reading my mind. One of my kids who he's a senior, loves physics, astrophysics, and wanted to marry love for design and architecture with his love for space. And early on in the relationship, he said, Dan, there's no way I can marry you. They're completely different. He said, you know what? Habitat. Like it's all about habitat, which you've been doing ever since you started building constructions with cardboard and design. Like it's all about that. And you see the light go on. You've seen this, right? With the light go on with your sons. When the light goes on, you're like, have you thought about this school? Have you thought about that one? I hadn't really. Like I hadn't heard of Case Western. And the family certainly doesn't need the money. And they're still waiting to hear from some other ones. But Case Western stepped up with 120 grand. And you know how it works. You play whack-a-mole, right? 120 grand first one, somebody else is going to offer two. They're going to be, sure, here's two. So it's not that it also is when you're able to point to that and say, we got that may be a step up to getting a research position or something with the professor. But from the front end of things, you want your kid to be happy and to be grateful. Because if it's not a good fit, then it doesn't matter
Yeah,
how much money you get. It doesn't
yeah,
matter how much money you get.
yeah. But
So
that's the
to cut,
thing. That's why I think
right?
is that like she just didn't get, I don't think she got good advice.
Okay. And I want to come back to what you said about the essays because it played I think it played an important part in the work that I was able to do with your son. Again, I'm a catalyst. I'm a catalyst. I empower like extraordinary, like planet changing kids like Billy to do it. But and I do remember you're calling me because we got started reasonably early. I'm starting much earlier right now. I'm actually working with some of my sophomores are actually looking at the PIQs at the UCs and looking at the Common App prompts just to plant the seed. We're not doing any writing, but let's create that arc going right now. All of my juniors broke ground on all of their, on just the thinking, wrote line one in December. And it's not like, oh, I'm trying to give them an unfair, but what they can say, I actually started my essay last year. Psychologically, what's your view on that? Just breaking ground, just not even just looking at
It's
things.
like they always say, it's like the, like I said, I have plenty of friends who started all this stuff in freaking seventh grade,
Mm.
but that's just not me. And so for us, it's that whole, you need to have your Common App essay done before you start school. And then and at Harvard, it's like they have a seminar. It's usually like the first week after school starts. So basically, it just kickstarts you.
After senior, you're talking about senior year when they're
No,
first,
after junior year.
after
It's the
junior.
first week
Okay.
of summer. So you
Okay.
do it this summer. And people who can take these classes are
Mm.
current students. So you can have, there's three classes offered. And one's the first week of June, and the other ones are like in August. And I was like, oh no, you sign up for the first week of June, and then you have it done by the time they start school because they get too busy at school.
Mm.
So I think that, I mean, as long as it doesn't get stale, right? That's the only
Yeah, yeah. Just to
applying for
clarify,
colleges for 2 years. It'll blow your
no, no,
brain
no,
up.
yeah. No, just to clarify, I'm not having them actually starting the writing. I'm just having them break the ground on the thinking. Wow, I'm glad I'm looking at this. And then some are like, I don't want to look at it, and that's fine. I'm not forcing them to. But you know that with
I
this,
feel like with you, isn't it just more, it's more coaching. Like I always think it's like a
yeah.
kid version of being an executive coach. So you're just helping them being themselves. And then eventually it'll be, but I thought it was much more the approach of of the whole kid type thing.
No, yeah, it certainly is. And in the case of it, I had the first bite of the apple I had with your son was in late spring, early summer, and he was working on his Common App, his primary Common App
So
essay,
it
which
would have
was
been in the summer because
right, it
that's when
was
he
a
would have done his comment out,
summer.
summer.
And you called, and you said, "Do we have a timeline on this one?" I remember you called, and you gave me the H2 statement a little later. You're like, "I want this thing done for him." You weren't yelling at me, but you were. I could tell a little, tiny bit of frustration. He wasn't really dragging
He's
his feet, but there were.
terrible. He's terrible about that. He is absolutely terrible. Terrible. Like making him write his thank you notes for his graduation present is like pulling teeth, and they're horrendously late. But
Hmm.
almost to a note, I would get an email back. That is the best thank you note I have ever read in my entire life. But making him do that, I seriously was going to shoot myself. And I'm telling you, every time moment when he'd sit down, I put the note in front of him, trying to get that thing done. And it's awful. But I will say, every single time, that is, I read it out loud. This is how, this is how you should write. It's ridiculous, but pulling teeth. He's terrible.
So, what's your view on having a kid? In your case, your kid, but you've seen other kids do this, trying to get your kid to do something that you know is in his best interest, knowing that they're not going to obey you, that they're going to just take their own time. Like, where do you put that frustration? Like, where do
You
you put
can't.
that delta?
You just have to let it go. You let it go. And like I said, let it go. And I believe me, like with Danny, I was like, babe, you end up at Santa Monica City College for 2 years. I'll save so much money. I'm good. Do whatever you want.
You were, and we talked about, oh, I reached out to Billy. I said, I have, this is selfish because I really wanted a chance to work with your second kid. You know, he's really chill. It's not that he doesn't want to work with you, Dan.
Fine.
Like, he's just got this.
Yeah,
Like,
the
more
only
power
person,
to
no, the
him.
person who worked on him was Billy. Billy helped him with
Oh, was
stuff.
that? I did not know that. So his
Yeah.
brother worked with his brother.
But
So
like
your elder son,
one
they're separated by
weekend.
a year. They're separated by
Yeah.
1 year. Yes.
But like on a weekend. Like he didn't do, yeah, no. He didn't do it. No, he didn't do much.
I
He was fine.
I wanted
Um,
to talk about. Oh, go ahead, please.
yeah, no, but I was saying that's fine. But like I said, I'm also not, we're not crazy Korean parents.
No, Bill certainly is, and he's about as white as they get. But you're not. No, you're not. You are not helicopter. You're not helicopter or parents or tiger moms. You're not. You are Korean, but you break the mold on that thing too. And I think there's a lot of. I think it's a continuum, right? I don't think that there's.
I have a lot of friends like me.
I wouldn't say friends like you, Korean or Asian
But we
girlfriends.
don't hang out with the other ones. They're crazy.
Talk about that a little bit before we talk about the essay crafting process and what your son's extraordinary, just extraordinary story on that one. And we link that up with your comment before. Talk about the tiger moms and the helicopter mom, Asian moms that you hang, and the other, like the two types that
I
you
just
see.
have them like I always feel like if you have tutors for every subject, like how on earth are you going to be able to figure it out? Are you going to have that in college too? I mean, do they?
Right.
No idea.
No, they don't. They don't.
I think they probably
No, they can. They can. But you nailed it before, and you remember this from college. The part of the thing of being in college is figuring out how life works. Just doing your laundry is the Plato's shadow on the wall for that thing. Like, where do you go? How do you advocate for a professor if you want to switch tracks? And they're like, the computer says, no, there isn't room. Of course you can switch. You self-advocate in a way that is organic. We've spoken about that before too. But then to build in the tutoring and all of that too, while you're trying to forge relationships with new people and maybe find disciplines that your kids were very specific in going in, but you never know. They may find, oh, there's an anthro. I never knew I was interested in anthro. Or I hated whatever physics in school, but physics for poets, this is a really cool class. I think I'll try that. Right. So when you have tutors in the middle of that, I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, but particularly at the top schools where there's this grade inflation, they know they're going to get pretty good grades. It's guaranteed, but there's that support underneath it. It's hard to
I just
fail.
feel like I said, they got to
Yeah.
figure this out by themselves. Like you just can't. If you don't let them fall, they're never gonna fly, right?
So beautifully said. Will you say that again? I heard you say, if you don't let them fall, they're not going to fly. Can you say that
Yeah.
again?
I said if you don't let them fall, they're never gonna fly.
Did this show up for you when you were growing up? Did you, if I can ask this, did you come from a traditional Korean tiger mom, tiger dad family? What was your,
Expectations are always to do your best, and but I work. My parents worked we were latchkey kids, and my parents worked the entire time.
hmm.
So yes and no. It's just like you lead by example. You see your parents working so hard.
They did. And your kids are, I don't know them as well, but in those lovely dinners, we'd have them come over and teach them magic tricks. And then they teach it back to me. One of them came back to me the next time I saw him. He said, I found a better way to do that. Show me.
Yeah.
I think you both were either, Bill was cooking and he said, I said, do you want your dad to come? He said, I actually don't. I just want to show you. And he'd taken this classic event, Winston Churchill's favorite trick that I'd done with him before. And he said, I think
Oh,
this is a better way to do that. I don't think I ever told you or Bill this. This was the
no,
trick
that's
that
great.
fried Churchill every night when it was invented. He said, do it again. It's a classic. It's a beautiful piece of psychology. It's just a beautiful piece. And when you tell people, when you actually show people this whole thing about never tell magicians, if you never teach a magician your secret, there would be no more magicians.
Yeah,
But the way that he came back and did it was so like he folded space on this one. It was just such a Billy and Danny, they each had their own way of doing it because it was so cool. I said every kid should have just something cool, but it's in somebody else's hands. Put it in their hands because
yeah,
and they had done that, which is so in brand for your kids. I wanted to come back to this thing about the essay and your question about do they really read them? They do, but you need to punch through the clutter. And gone are the days when you'd get back in our day,
they
because
read
UCLA had the PIQ system, right?
who
You get a
reads them.
15-minute read or something. These days, you're lucky if you get a 3-minute read. And you've got
But
to go
but
through this
honestly,
training
Dan,
thing.
who reads them?
So, no, it's a great question. Here, it's a great question. So, if you are early to the party, if you're an early decision, or you're an REA, you're an EA, you're going to get an AO or an AO junior or one of the
Like
trained
at the
readers.
UCs, they have that many to read 100,000 essays.
No, but you want to be early to the party. So the UCs, there's a time that you can start applying, and then the UCs report late. No, but a lot follow. Don't forget, because the UCs are test blind. So the things that matter are the only things that'll count are your grades, which matter a lot, probably more so there than anywhere else.
Yeah,
Your grades, they don't take LORs, so those you can't even submit letters of recommendation, which are essentially like, what's your kid's character? Because most
yeah,
LORs are like, Johnny was a great student and he did
yeah,
well in class. I wish that doesn't, but that differentiator, even if it's written well. So there isn't that data point. They've got grades, they've got the PIQs, the essays, and they've got that really essential activities section, which most people dash off at the end. Remember when we were talking about Billy and you guys came back at the end, they're like, the essay's done. It looks great. He finally showed it to us. He's done the subs for Chicago. There's the Why Chicago. What are we missing? And I said, how is the activity? How's that the activity section? That's usually where the big public quicksand is, that one in the letters of recommendation. And you said the LORs are killer. And I talked to Billy about that. And he gave me pushback on these. I'm sure they'll be good. I'm like, let's make sure they're good. Let's make sure that you lean into these teachers you have relationships with and tell them what your narrative is. They can always choose to do whatever, but to the degree that you can help control the narrative. Because
yeah,
ultimately what it comes down to, H, is that yes, they're reading thousands of these, but so many of them, and I say this with great respect to the kids who apply, are along the lines of, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a successful, there's nothing that makes them stand out. There's that adage here. We spoke about this at dinner. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. The early bird gets the worm. But it's not that way. It goes more in the direction of the Japanese proverb that the peg that sticks up gets hammered down. There's I'm going to be different by blending in because I'm sure that my grades and my being in this club and my being in this sport are going to, they don't. They make you blend. So that what they used to call the spike, whatever it is that makes you different organically. So case in point, with this just stunning opener that Billy had for his essay, I don't think of breaking confidence. You did read his essay
Yeah.
too. Okay. Which opened with, and I want to reach out to your son and see if he'll give me permission to let me use that opening line as an example. You've seen these books like winning essays. That was a winning essay for that kid. But I would say that of the hundreds and hundreds of kids I've worked with in this space and the thousands I've worked with over time, because I started working with kids when I was 12, teaching magic to 8-year-olds
Hmm.
in Newton. I mean, with kids since I was a kid. That is probably one of the 10 best openers I've ever seen. But
Oh,
not because it was engineered to be an opener. Because if you can make an AO, here's to your point before, and this is my opinion, but I want to hear yours. If you can make an admissions officer, and who's doing the reading? It's an admissions officer or it's a trained reader, a TA, or usually moms who've had kids go through that and they go through rigorous training to be able to read these things and they sort them really fast. If they get to pick, it doesn't matter how great the kid is. They could have invented a thought-powered electric invisible car. If you're boring, they're like or
oh,
out.
believe me, I know who reads them at Chicago. I was
Right.
saying at the UCs when they get
Oh, yeah, no, the UCs have their so they got the personal interest questions, they're the PIQs, and they have them different. So it's not one person reading on very you think, oh, it's one person reading all four. They very often split it out. It really depends. And it also depends what department you're applying to. So if you're applying to nursing's the hardest thing to get into, less than 1%. You apply to UC, less than 1%. Isn't that insane? In a
crazy.
profession where we really need nurses.
Yeah.
On the other end of the spectrum is you would think music is like cutthroat, like so cutthroat. We apply to the Herb Alpert. It's not a cakewalk in, but
Yeah.
pretty good chance of getting into the Herb. Why? Because everybody wants to stampede towards Berkeley or the other schools. So it's an Albert, the Albert family put in gajillions of dollars for them.
Yeah.
So it all depends. And this is where it's trending because of there's this gargantuan stampede towards STEM there. So if you are, God help you, for an Asian kid who wants to double major in comp sci and physics, you better really punch through the clutter on that PI on those PIQs. But
Yeah.
even it's like, how do you do it? And it's not like there has to be some magic re-engineering words. It's just coming from the heart. So case in point with Billy, to whom I am going to reach out. He may say he doesn't want to do it, but I want to use as I expand overseas and here just examples of winning like opening lines. And the smaller the better. And he asked, and essentially I'll boil it down where this won't make it into the book unless I get his permission. It was him playing in Fiddler on the Roof as an Asian kid who was half the size of his. And it was just, he said, I think he said something like, is it a big enough open? Will it matter enough? I said, it's such a sharp, pointy tip of the spear. I said, but the most important thing is like they can't look away. They have to see the next card. And the best part is you didn't engineer it that way. And if
Yeah.
you can make an AO or anybody at any school, whether it's anywhere, this is true in life.
Yeah.
For God's sake, be entertaining. Hook their interest.
Yeah.
Get them.
Yeah.
He
No,
had that. He had that. And then he leaned into it. And there was a process because he's very, yeah, do. But it was very analytical. And then he went back, I'm not really sure about that piece. But at the end, it was a breathtaking essay. And I remember asking him, do you want to show this to your parents? He's like, nope. And Bill called and he's, what's your hit? I'm not showing it. I said, he'll show it to you when if and when he's ready. And you and I had the same conversation. I think you said something along the lines of, Dan, in your experience, do all kids show them to your parents? Not all the time. Very
no.
often they'll show them to their siblings. Very often they show them to their siblings
Yeah.
or their friends. And very often it's a very private kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
Anyway, Danny, I got to get going.
all right. All right. H, I really appreciate it. Can you give me one
Okay.
more question?
Of
If you
course.
had advice to give moms out there, any other moms out there who are going through this, the process of the fear and the anxiety and all of this kind of stuff, what would it be? What would your top three pieces of advice be?
Just chill. Everything's going to be fine.
Okay.
Honestly, really. Just everything will be fine. Everything always works out.
I love you and Bill so much. Your friendship means a lot. It's so great to see you again. And I
Yeah.
hope to see you again. Mazel tov on the move to the new house. And I thank you
All
so
right.
much for your time
All
here.
right. Bye, honey.